The tall, gangly thing?
Hello and welcome. Today I am joined by TFT Caster. You may know him from Hearthstone. You might have seen him at the Challenger Series, and if not, you're definitely going to see him at the Zaun Cup. It's Admirable. Admirable, thank you so much for being here today. How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. You know, I really love all the videos you've been producing. I love all the interviews you've been doing, and frankly, I just think they're very well done. And I think that the camera dynamic that you can see here is a pretty great example of one of the reasons why I think that. So I'm happy to be here. You know, this is always fun to be doing stuff like this and kind of talking about things and getting in depth. It's kind of difficult to get into a lot of these questions that are dedicated and ready to be answered in a certain way as well. You know, preparation is very key.
Sure.
So thanks for having me here, Gagley. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so, for anyone who may not be as familiar with who you are, why don't we just start off first and have you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Well, my name is Nathan Zamora, and I have been into gaming for basically my entire life at this point. I started playing Magic in 1996, and very shortly thereafter, I realized, wow, I've been playing Magic for a year, and this game is pretty much captured the entirety of my interest at this point. And I played my first tournament at 12 years old. I didn't win that first tournament, but I did win my first tournament at 12 years old. And at that point, I was very dedicated to the idea of gaming. And I didn't know if I was going to be selling them or creating them or competing in them or what it was going to be. But I knew that games somehow were going to be the life. And then in high school, I got into theater, and theater really captured my attention for a great deal of time there. I stopped working in the performance spot in terms of theater because it just really was not paying you enough to eat food and really do anything else. You could eat food, but that was about it. And so I just got back into the gaming, and I was, buying and selling collection cards for a while. I was playing poker for a number of years full time. And when Hearthstone came out, that was about 2013. And late in 2013, I really got into it. I was able to compete at the top end of that. And then shortly thereafter, I got asked to cast something because somebody really liked the voice I had when they heard me streaming. And then from there, it just kind of spiraled, and I got into casting, and here we are.
Very nice. Yeah, and for the record, the voice is a thing that I'm definitely drawn to the most as well. I love the voice. You definitely have such a unique timbre that I think of many other casters who try and get into the space don't quite have. So just letting you know, I'm a big fan. Love that. Now, obviously, you talked about the fact that you've been in the role both as a competitor and a caster. And something that I really want to get into is kind of like the satisfaction that comes from these two roles. I mean, obviously, you can learn to exceed both as a caster and learn to succeed as a competitor, but I'm sure they differ. What does how does the satisfaction of these two roles compare?
It's really different. Like in one aspect, they share a great deal of similarity in that you're at the competition of the event. And the whole purpose of being at the competition of the event is to see what the peak of it is. And whether that peak is yourself, a friend of yours, perhaps one of those, I don't know, hypothetical enemies, I guess, or just whatever it is. The point is to see the peak of performance at the event. And so when you're in a competitive stage, you really have that pressure oftentimes on your shoulders, especially the deeper you get into tournaments. From the competitive side of things, I've always competed in variance strategy games. And so there's a lot of times where you just, no matter how well prepared you are, you're just going to go 0-2 and you're like, well, I just don't feel like playing anymore. And you bomb out of the event. So be it. A lot of times it's not that way, and you end up getting deep into the tournament. And so that pressure really starts building up on your shoulders. Like, hey, I have to keep performing at this high rate. I have to look deep into these turns and really plan this stuff out and make sure I'm not missing anything, because missing the most minute thing possible can have a cascading effect where you lose the match. And so when you're in a performance position, it's really different because everyone's going to treat that differently and have a different kind of feeling when you're at that event. For me personally, sometimes I really enjoy talking with all my friends and talking about certain situations. Sometimes I feel like I'm just going to walk around the building floor in circles and just make sure that I, breathe deeply and keep my concentration focused and make sure I'm drinking tons of water. I'm always drinking tons of water, just for what it's worth. That's one of the keys to winning tournaments. I digress. In terms of like the casting aspect of it, what ends up happening is you get to help enhance what that feeling is supposed to be. Like, the whole reason that you're watching a tournament is to have fun. And if you're not having fun as the caster, what that means is the people who are watching probably aren't having fun either. So I really try to find the aspect of it that is very exciting to me, and then highlight that moment and really let my passion rip for it, because I've shared this passion of like the excitement of the peak of a tournament my entire life, literally since I was 12 years old. And this kind of thing didn't exist when I was a wee lad. And if I had had that, I can only imagine how much different the journey and the path would have been. And so to a certain aspect, I am trying to like unlock that potential as well, where it's like, if you have this kind of passion about a game, that's true. That's real. You love that aspect. Please let that flare and highlight. Don't let anyone restrict that or hold that back. And so I'm trying to like find a way that can unlock that. Like maybe I can inspire somebody to let that passion rip and see how it can shape things for what they want to do in the future. So they share a lot of similarity in terms of the excitement and the peak of them that are there, but a very different type of actual satisfaction. Where on one level, I'm like, damn, I wish I could be competing in this. And on the other level, it's like, golly, I just got to watch the best players in the world compete at this. And they chose me to be here and highlight this moment. This is fantastic. So it's very different things, but you know, a similar fashion. Like, what's the thing where the two circles come together and they have the overlap?
A Venn diagram?
Yes, it's got like a Venn diagram thing to it.
You know, Twitch has really like revolutionized how people see gaming. Obviously, the accessibility is like the most obvious thing about it. And because of that, I mean, a new generation of gamers is constantly being inspired because they have the access to see what the best players are doing essentially at all times. And so I want to ask, when it comes to casting, what does inspiration look like? Like, where do you find inspiration as a caster?
A lot of that has to do in kind of just what I was talking about, just the fact that I've always been so excited about it since I was a kid. And I was really into sports when I was younger. Like I lived in Houston. And so I was growing up when that Houston Rockets era where the Bulls were winning every single championship. But the Houston Rockets made it just squeeze two in there when Jordan had left the season for a bit. And it was just, I was so into basketball at that point. And when you're that into basketball, you're going to be watching Sports Center in the morning and you're going to be watching all the games. And I was just really into the idea that somebody was highlighting all of these moments that were happening, even though the whole relevance of them was the live performance. And so at a very young age, I was like, gosh, I wish I could be into that. And I remember in my head when I would watch these games as a kid, I would like visualize ways to be casting them myself. And it was just like, God, this just seems like it was so much fun. And I never really told anybody about that either. I never shared that idea. I never even really pursued it. It was just kind of like always in my head. And I think that theater in high school really changed that for me. And after high school, the fact that I was still pursuing theater stuff really helped enhance that idea. But for me, really, the inspiration of it is drawn just purely, I think, from the passion point where I want to highlight these ideas, and I want people to realize like there's so much depth that's available to these situations, and game developers put so much work into making this game happen. And so when they create this beautiful piece of artwork that I think that Teamfight Tactics is, like, wow, like, I mean, again, I've been playing games for 2.5 decades, like almost full time at this point, and Teamfight Tactics has captured my interest more than just about anything I think I've ever touched. And I've had to walk away from Teamfight Tactics at times because I was, full time casting another game. But now that I'm into like Teamfight Tactics and like this is like my sole focus, it's just, my gosh, I'm trying to figure out different ways to present the ideas and the excitement and the passion that exists within this element of a game. Like, it is just a game at the end of the day, but the further you step into a hobby, the more that you're going to see about it and the more that you're going to understand. And so that's really where that inspiration gets drawn, is it just feels like no matter how much that I learn about the game or how much that I find, that there's always something more to it. And then you add in the aspect of competition, like, I mean, just think about how big of tangents and rants I'm going on from this one singular question. And now imagine you add another layer to that and let that expand and explode. It's not going to stop, Gangly. Unless you want a 6-hour interview here, I'd slow these questions down a little bit.
Sure. Well, let's move on, because I want to talk about another part of your life real quick that you mentioned before, which was there was a period of time where you were playing poker full time. And last week I sat down with Aesah, the winner of the Challenger Series, who had a really interesting way of looking at competitive TFT, something that I actually hadn't really thought of before. And he made the statement, I'm going to quote it, not necessarily verbatim, so granted, if anyone's watching this and I don't give the exact quote, forgive me. Aesah said something along the lines of, going into the Challenger Series, he believed that all 16 players had roughly the same chance of winning the event. And I want to say that the difference he gave was maybe plus 5 or 10% for the high end, like Sox, minus 5 or 10% for maybe the worst player in that event. And that's a really interesting assessment to me, because obviously when you're playing a game, you always want to believe that like player agency is an important part of the game. Obviously, coming from poker, coming from Magic, you have experience in games of variance. So I want to know, do you agree with Aesah's assessment of the Challenger series?
I mostly agree to it. In terms of like who has a stronger chance and whatnot, that is going to be, my gosh, that's such a difficult thing to calculate. I think that he's trying to approach it from more of like a theoretical perspective than like an actual I've evaluated this and sat down and done the math sort of thing. But I think to me it's very clear that when you look at tournament performances and when you look at like ladder performances and volume and the performance that are within those as well, that it's very clear that there is so much more about the game that is probably yet to even be discovered at this point, that players are often harnessing, I think, instinctually. And it's something that like no one sat down and like done all the math or broke everything down or really tried to figure it out. Because when you see a roll down, you have 30 seconds to go through, I don't know, let's say you roll 20 gold in that window. That is then what is that, 100 different units that you have seen at that
Yep.
point, and you have to put 7 or 8 of them in play, and you have to get rid of some of them, and you also have to put items on them, and you also have to position them, and you also have to consider who else is doing this and what they have, and you also have to consider your life total, and you also have to consider what future items. There's just no way you can calculate all this in 30 seconds. Like, we're not ultra computers. Like the NASA supercomputers would still have to be programmed to figure this stuff out, like let alone a human being. Um, so there's a lot that goes on there. I think that operates instinctually, but it's very clear. I think that some players have pretty significant advantages, and I don't necessarily think it's just because they're that much better than everybody else. It's probably just because that their ability to evaluate certain critical situations can happen a little bit faster than others. So I think that like the idea that everyone has an equal chance, yes, that is true. But in terms of do players actually have an equal chance? It's like, well, no, they clearly don't. Like there are some players that are more dedicated. There's some that are more practiced. There are some that just their play style matches whatever patch that we're on better than it's going to match the other players. And it just honestly, it's almost like it's adding more variance into the idea, the element of it. But that's where practice really matters in a situation like that. Like the metagame for TFT, I think, is just quite literally practice. There is like a conceptual metagame, but you come into the game with nothing. You come in with information, ideas, knowledge, what you're going to do, but there's not an actual metagame. You bring nothing into the lobby of TFT. And so everyone's chance is equal, but it clearly isn't at the same time. I think that Aesah, after seeing him play, I think had a much bigger advantage than he probably thinks he had. Um, but at the same time, almost anyone can kind of hit those big spikes in games. We're looking at a pretty low sample size of games that are getting played. So if you just happen to get lucky for 10 games in a row, very good chance you're going to win at that point. And honestly, it's just not super unlikely that something like that happens to at least one player there. So yes and no. I agree with him, but I do disagree. I think practice is a huge difference in TFT.
Yeah, so kind of going off this idea of consistency in tournament, what it looks like to actually be like one of the best players, what it looks like to be a tournament performer. TFT, and similar to many games of variance, the best player in the world is never going to win every tournament. It's just it's impossible for the skill level that the players are at right now to see one player win every single event. That said, I think that there are still other ways to kind of measure consistency in the game. If anyone saw the video I released on who I thought was the strongest tournament performer, I used a metric called final day rate, just seeing how many players are making it to the final day of competition. You kind of widen the bullseye and then judge consistency that way. I'm curious to know from you, what do you think consistency looks like at the highest level of TFT?
First of all, that was a fantastic video that you made.
Thank you.
I will also say, without going into a tangent of it, that I disagreed with you. However, I think that your evaluation system is very strong, and I'm looking forward to seeing perhaps more of that in the future. Hint, hint. Um, what makes players consistent in high level variant strategy games? So let's go into TFT specifically. It's what are we looking at in terms of process? So number one is a lot of qualification stuff is based on your ladder performance, where you are there. So one of the number one variables I would look at is someone's ladder performance, and not necessarily where they're standing in a ladder, but rather how many games have they played, and then what are their breakdowns of those games? Like which top four rate, what's your win rate, and are you actually playing at a high level, or have you played 26 games in Platinum 3?
Sure.
There is a difference there. You should never be judging yourself based on your ladder performance. It has nothing to do with you as a human being, that sort of thing. It's like the ladder is there quite literally to equalize the balance of who you're playing against. That's the whole point of the ladder. So when you're looking at ladder performance and it comes into a qualification process, really the things that you're looking at are top 4 performance, win rate, and then game volume at that point. If your volume is very high and you have a high win rate and a high top 4 rate, you know what? You're probably one of those top players in the world. When it comes to a tournament spot, there are some tournaments elements that can change the way that you're going to play the game, but those come up a little bit rare, and they don't really come up usually until about the end of the day or into like day 2 or day 3, somewhat so on and so forth. And so the number one thing that I would look at then is how many tournaments has someone played, and then how often do they just get to the next stage of it, and how consistently do they get to the next stage of it. I think that's a huge part of it, because it can be shaped in a number of ways too. Like sometimes, there are going to be high end players who really just don't care that much about doing well in tournaments. They just really like playing the game. That does exist. There's going to be players who are super dedicated to the idea of competition. So their ladder performances are not going to be high volume, but their tournament performances are going to be very strong. There are players who care about both, and they have those go hand in hand. And then there are some players who they just kind of do unusual things, and almost everything you see from them is very unlike what you're witnessing from most of the tournament spots. And sometimes they do extremely well in tournaments, and sometimes they just don't do extremely well in tournaments. And it's hard to assess like what all these things are, but basically it's just, are you making it to the next stage of a tournament? If you're doing that pretty consistently, I think you're just a better tournament player at that point. I think that wins will show up if you are constantly making it to that next stage. And if you're not constantly making it to the next stage, well, guess what? You're probably not going to have that many tournament wins because you're not making it to the next stage very often. But this is just like the variance strategy element is, are you moving to the next stage? If the answer is yes, how often are you moving to the next stage? And then how many stages are there? And those are going to be like the 3 evaluation points that I have.
Now, for what it's worth, I do want to just say, the floor is open. If you do want to kind of give a spiel on who you think is the best tournament player, if you want to kind of flame me, tell me why I'm dumb for thinking it's Spencer. No, just so you know, the floor is open. If you feel like you want to go on that tangent, jump right into it. If not, we can go straight into into the next section.
All right, you're free to edit this as you choose.
Okay, sure.
Even if you wanted to leave in this point to let everyone know, but this is probably going to go pretty quickly, and it's going to sound. I feel like it feels like I'm almost jumping on the bandwagon at this point, but honestly, I just feel like Ramblin's the best player in the world. And the reason I feel like Ramblin's the best player in the world mostly is because of his dedication to quality practice and his execution also of the goals that he has with quality practice. Ramblin enjoys the game, and if he's not going to enjoy the game, he's just not going to play it. And at the very start of, I think it was PBE for set 6, I remember watching his stream, and he had a little dots with the points on, like, it felt like a PowerPoint presentation he was giving. He was like, "These are the goals I have for getting better this set," and I'm like, I've never even thought of half of these things. He's already decided I need to execute these elements better. By the way, everything else I'm doing, but these are the ones that I haven't focused on. And I'm just, my gosh, when you see players doing stuff like that, that's when you know that their mind is beat the game. And beating the game in teamfight tactics means defeating everybody else in the world. And when you're that dedicated to it, the quality of practice that you have is going to be such a highlight. And I think like probably one of the more predictable points of who's going to be the strongest at that point. I remember back in 2014, the year that Firebat won the Hearthstone World Championship. It was in July of that year that he messaged me asking for a coaching session. And at that point, Firebat was the number 1 ranked player on the ladder. And I said, I don't really know if I'm offering you coaching in a situation like that. But we did sit down and we practiced, and he just had geometrical distribution charts built out for decks. And like, he's like, so you really want 2.35 drops in this deck to see the most consistent ones. And you can't get 2.3. And if you go to 2, it actually cuts into the average. So I decided to put in 3 here. So I'm just like, nobody has ever done this in card games before. I've never seen anybody do this. And I had, again, been kind of pursuing the competitive aspect of it for, I don't know, almost like 18 years at that point. And when I saw that, I was like, Firebat's going to win the world championship. I was like, he's just so much farther ahead than everybody else. And just very consistently, every time I watched him do anything, it felt like he was 2 games to 1 every single time. And then flash forward to November of that year, and he actually won the world championship. I couldn't believe it. And it's in combination with the fact that that was one of the highlighted moments for me where it was quality of practice really defined the gameplay. He was a friend of mine at that point. And so it felt so surreal for me to actually believe he was going to win the world championship in July. And then he actually won the world championship. And so it's probably just like one of the most embarrassing casting moments I have of all time, where I am way over shouting that Firebat has won the world championship right now. If you haven't seen this, I really discourage you from going to watch it, because it is genuinely embarrassing to hear that moment of myself where they just kept using it over and over at the start of almost every single tournament I cast. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so embarrassing. But it is there. And the quality of practice, again, that was kind of like, it's an anecdotal thing, but quality of practice I have consistently seen throughout my pursuit of competition be the definition of who ends up being the strongest. And I think that there's no way to know what everyone else is practicing with and how they're doing so, but Ramblin' it kind of makes that public, and you can see the improvement on top of the fact that he's already incredibly strong at the game.
Yeah, of course.
I'm just, even if the performance isn't going to be hand in hand with it, I'm probably going to be claiming that until there's another step in team fight tactics and there's a reason to focus on somebody else.
Yeah, and I will say, even though it's not the same conclusion I came to, we've seen the evidence of this style of preparation work in the past. Ram Kevin Set 4 is like a great example of that, of these players who treat their ladder performance as a training ground for qualification rather than the ultimate goal being claiming rank 1, right? Same thing I would say with Pocky Gom in Set 5, who just nearly missed out on a world's qualification spot in an insane, Spencer Hyrule 5 Draconic Egg moment, which is a whole other thing in of itself.
The Pocky is the Vel'Koz won for an entire stage, somehow still being alive situation. If you didn't watch the NA regionals games, I really encourage you to go watch them, because they're honestly just some of like the strongest performances that I think I've ever even seen in a game. In general, it's crazy how strong they played in that one. Please continue though. I mean, you can feel free to edit that point if you need to edit that point.
No, yeah, I love it. And we'll kind of keep on this train of competitive TFT. I mean, one of the biggest things is that in the last year and a half, competitive TFT has grown in a significant margin. If you look at Set 3 versus what competitive is today, I mean, spectator mode being used in tournament, the pure volume of events that we have in North America, I mean, it is over and over again just better. That said, I don't think we've reached completion of what competitive TFT is going to be, and I'm curious to know, what do you actually think competitive TFT is missing?
That's an interesting question, because I'm not exactly an events organizer kind of person. I'm not necessarily I don't have experience like in the macro state of this, but what I do know is that some of the most exciting points of variant strategy games are going to be larger tournaments, and when the larger tournaments have some qualification process to them, but not necessarily like an extremely restrictive one. Like, I'll give an example for this. Like in Magic, under the old Pro Tour system, there were basically 4 Pro Tours a year, and then there was a World Championship. And in the midst of that, there were Grand Prix. Grand Prix, you could show up at where they were being hosted. You paid an entry fee. You played the event. For a Pro Tour, you had to qualify for it. So you either had to be like a top X ranked player in the world, X being the variable in that one. It changed pretty frequently, or you had to place at a certain point at a Grand Prix, or you had to have been placed, you had to have won a Pro Tour qualifier, which was an open event tournament that had an entry fee, or you had to have placed very well at the previous Pro Tour, or you had to have a consistent number of performances from the previous year that qualified you for that spot. Pretty restrictive process in terms of the Pro Tour stuff. However, the Pro Tours were extremely exciting to play at. They were very fun to go to. And the coverage of them, I don't necessarily think was the strongest coverage in the world, but I was very into the game, so I just watched all the coverage anyway, and I enjoyed it. I feel like this sort of aspect of a tournament can be refined very greatly, but I do feel like that a seasonal tournament that has some qualification process to it, but isn't super restrictive on it, could be a very exciting idea. Like, it's the one thing I want to see is I want to see international competition take place. I do love that there is regional competition being focused on, because I do think that is just a pretty strong way of doing things. Like, who's the best player from Europe? Who's the best player from the United States? Who's the best player from South America? Who's the best player from Japan? Who's the best player from those aspects of it are just very exciting. And now when you get to compete them all at one tournament, that is an exciting aspect here. So the one thing I really want to see is I want to see like more seasonal style championship. And I want to see that being focused on in a broader perspective, because I think that really, at the end of the day, this is a varied strategy game. You're not going to see the same player winning every single thing. It's virtually impossible that they win every single tournament because they're just better than everybody else. But getting an opportunity to win that tournament very, very often, that's going to be like the measure of strength, I think. It's like, wow, it's just like, imagine if Mismatched Socks was just always in a situation where you could win a tournament. Like, my gosh, it would be insane. And at a certain point, it felt that way. That's an exciting thing, because now you're getting to see this player at the start of a tournament. Can they do it again? Because it's not the end of it that really makes the difference. It's the path to get to that point. If it was going to be the end of it that makes the difference, well, TFT would be solved. We would just pick our endgame comp and then put it in a play and stick our items on board. But it's not what it is. It's how you get to that endgame comp. It's how you process the items you have when you get there, how you manage your gold. How did you manage the fights against the other players? How strong was the lobby? Were you doing win streak or loss streak? Were you alternating those wins and losses? Where were you on the carousel? All these little elements change it drastically at every single point, even though it feels like it's a very little tiny nuanced subtle detail. The position you are on a carousel could literally win or lose you the game. How did you get to that point? That's the measure of it. And so seeing this open tournament style, it's something that I really enjoy. Seeing a partial restriction, it's a pretty tough one, but not necessarily like a ridiculous one. I think that's really good as well. So that's why I want to see that mostly. I want to see larger tournaments take place. I would love to see a stronger compensation to them to really encourage players to more actively pursue that competition. And I would like to see just like the coverage continue to stay strong, because I feel like that we haven't necessarily found like the best way to broadcast TFT, but it's getting stronger. It does feel like that every single time. And just even for me personally, like how to cast the game, I don't feel like I've really struck the chord right, but I feel like I'm on the right path for it. And it's going to take a lot longer than I thought, though, because it just feels hard to cast this game. My gosh, like what's the exciting part? Should we be doing more analysis? Should you have multiple broadcast teams, perhaps? Like, I'm not really sure, but I think that larger tournament aspect is probably going to be one of the more exciting things that I can see in TFT.
Anyone who's been following my content for a while should know that I am a huge proponent of open brackets, something I've talked a lot about in the past. So to hear someone actually come on here and validate what I've been saying for a long time, I mean, the fastest way to make a tournament bigger is to have more people lose the tournament. It's simple math in that regard. So I love it. I love hearing that kind of thing. And I think that restrictions for events are great. Have higher quality events. That's no problem with that. But I'd love to see a more clear roadmap for some of these amateur players who want to say, I want to be Mismatched Socks.
Yeah.
Give me the chance to prove myself. Give me a roadmap to get to Worlds, and I'll show you that I can get there eventually.
Give me a reason to harness that passion. That's what I'm asking for in this one. I love the prestigious events. I love stuff like regionals actually being small. I love, mid-set finale. I love that kind of being a small event. But I love like the Open Cup stuff that happens. And frankly, I just wish there could be a different style of focus, I guess, taking place in that one, where it does feel like that these open tournaments maybe just they need a little bit more attention and a little bit more prestige to them in order to really start to highlight, how tough it is to actually win one of these tournaments, or even just like the top 8 or top 16 one of these events where there's 160, 180 players or what have you. It's not an easy thing to do. And so when you look at that perspective, I'm totally in agreement with you on that one. And honestly, it's one of the reasons I want to do this interview is because I agree with you on that aspect. I'm glad we get to talk about it. Bigger tournaments, bigger, better. All right. Like bigger numbers are just better, except for when you're talking about, I guess, placement in TFT.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. All right. Now we're running a little long on time, so I'm going to kind of, we're going to zoom through the next couple, but real quick, I want to know Zaun Cup coming up this weekend.
Yes.
Players to watch. Who are you looking for at this event?
So obviously, my eye is going to be on the big players pretty much always. Like Ramblin is who I called out earlier, is who I think is one of the strongest players, or rather the strongest player in the world. I'm going to keep my focus on that. But there's some players that I don't think necessarily have gotten big highlights. There's some things I want to look at. Imus Voidsons was a player at regionals. He did not have a strong regionals performance. However, he's just been really cool. And frankly, I think he plays really well, but sometimes he gets a little tilty. If he can not tilt at this event at all, I think he can perform pretty strong. Imus Voidsons one of the players I've been focused on. Luna Love, a very strong Hearthstone player who stepped into TFT and done so very strongly as well. Qualifying for Zaun Cup meant that you had to be like in a very top spot for some ladder position stuff. So Luna Love, a player that I very much have my eye on. There's a number of players that continues to go on for in terms of players that are coming from card games and stepping into TFT. I'm not going to be able to call them all out. Iniko is a player I want to highlight as well. I've just watched a ton of Iniko stream, and he kind of breaks down a lot of ideas into a very basic point to help the understanding of them be very easy. Although it does seem like Iniko can kind of tilt at times too. I'm sorry, Iniko. Iniko performed extremely well last year. Just didn't have a lot of opportunities, I think, to show that. But this is like the open tournaments are the ones that I really want to focus on, because you're going to see players step out of nowhere sometimes and really show like, yeah, I did take this tournament pretty seriously, and I'm here to show it now. And you're going to see that at times. So it's just, there's so many players I have my eye on this one. Ramblin's going to be my number one. I would say that Luna Love's going to be my underdog focus. And then for everything else, so just keep your eyes peeled, because I expect some crazy stuff to happen.
Now, today, literally, I think maybe 2 or 3 hours before we are recording this interview, the TFT devs dropped the dev drop of set 6, where they talked about 6.5, 20 different champions being swapped out, being introduced in 6.5. And additionally, they talked about, to me, probably the most exciting thing, the idea that Augments may be here to stay who knows how long. Going into set 7, it sounds like they're going to be building off of this set mechanic for the first time instead of introducing a brand new one. So we could talk about this for like an hour, but let's just kind of, I want to just hear your initial impressions based on what you saw from the dev drop.
My initial impressions are that they put so much work into this set, and it clearly showed. And on top of that, it seems like they also struck gold.
Oh, yeah.
The augments, I think, are such a strong element. And there are so many different ways that you could do augment stuff that's going to be, I think, one of the challenges they face are, can they meet the same expectations that they have right now? Can they improve that quality of life situation? And can they continue to diversify it enough that it doesn't feel like it's just augments are here to stay, but rather the idea of augments are really here to stay? I have a lot of faith that they can do that, because that's just kind of, what they've shown in the past is that they can change a lot of things and still have it feel familiar, but have it feel different. And I think that's a real challenge they're going to be facing. I'm really happy to see that augments are something that could potentially just absolutely stay. If they just roll over to set 7 as just augments, like, yeah, sure, I'd shrug it off. Like, you know what? It's just a good idea. I'm totally fine with it. But to see how they're going to change it, I think, is something that's going to be very exciting. And it's very clear that they have put so much work into set 6, and that's going to continue to roll over into future sets. And I'm so excited to see how it's going to be changing, because I do feel like that, while there's a number of bugs and things that happen, and sometimes the balance stuff, it shows up like a week and a half into the patch where it's like, ooh, yeah, this thing really is broken. A lot of times it took like a week to find. And that's the world that's working to finding that process. So can the dev team find it? How on earth did they misbalance this thing? It took the rest of the players in the world a week to find it. It's such an unrealistic notion. Like, well, of course they didn't find it then. They have a team. They have to pay all these people, by the way. You can't hire everyone in the world to find this. Augments, big thumbs up. I want to see more stuff of that in the past. I think it adds player agency, and I think it adds depth and strategy. It does add some variance, but I don't think the variance is nearly as heavy as some players put emphasis on. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how they're doing this, because I think that so far they've done like a design and the balance aspect pretty damn well in set 6 so far. A couple things that I've completely disagreed with, just based on some numbers and logic things, but it's very minute highlights that it's just not even worth bringing up at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I gotta say, this is like the first time in TFT history where I've actually felt to myself, I don't want this set to end. Like, I don't want to know what's coming, because I just like augments. Like, I could play this for much longer than the normal lifespan of a set. To me, hearing that augments are here to stay, it's incredibly exciting. But Admirable, that's all the questions I had for you today. Thank you so much for coming on. Before we go, is there anything you'd like to shout out?
First, Gangley, I actually want to shout you out in this aspect. I think that the content you're making is fantastic. I think it's clear that you put a lot of work and dedication into this, and I think it's clear that you also have experience doing this sort of thing. And I think this is really important for highlighting the passion of competitive play. So first of all, thank you to you for just producing strong videos. I hope that you continue to do this. And I'm sorry that I'm dragging you down for this aspect of it. However, if you want to see some drag down content, @That's Admirable on Twitter is going to be the main point of where I dump my information on stuff. I do stream, although my stream has not been the same as it was in the past. I do not intend to be a full-time streamer. However, I do want to have consistent streaming going on. This is mostly, I'd say, inspired by Frodan. Frodan has been a huge inspiration, motivation, and support for me over the last 7 years. And it's incredible how much he has helped me get done, despite the fact that oftentimes, we'll kind of go into discussions about things and he'll be like, "Oh, I helped you do that." I'm like, Yes, Dan, you clearly helped me do that. You did a lot of work." Dan was the officiant at my wedding. Um,
Wow. That man can cast anything.
Anything. And he did a fantastic job there, but I digress. A big shout out to Dan, just, as a thank you to all the help that he's provided in this one. I'm not going to be able to name everybody's name in this one, but honestly, just a big thanks to the TFT community and to the people who I communicate with like on a daily process. Those people provide so much motivation, inspiration, and help to what I do that it truly, I would not have been able to do things as I'm doing them if it wasn't for them. I think I could have gotten to these points, but it probably would have taken me, 5 times the amount of time. So everything that's been done in that aspect is truly helpful. And I hope that this continues in the TFT community as well, where people are not seeing the game so much as like an enemy competition thing, but rather just who got there first kind of competition thing, where everybody's almost supporting each other constantly all the time. Like that makes the competition almost more fun, because then it's like, when you lose, it stings, but when you get to see your friend win, it's really fucking awesome. So I just hope that aspect of it continues as well. It's been so supportive and so awesome. So just thank you to everybody who's basically been involved with the game in any positive aspect.
Again, thank you, Admirable, for coming on. I loved having you on. I think we got a lot of great conversation out of this interview. To everyone watching, thank you guys for watching all the way through this interview. I know it's a little longer, but honestly, there was a lot of really fun content in here, so I really hope you guys enjoyed it. For more TFT coverage, content, and guides, make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.